Welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast, a show designed to change the way we talk and think about education. I'm Charles Williams, and together we'll explore untold stories, bold ideas, and innovative approaches that transform our schools and communities. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Counter Narrative Podcast. As always, thank you so much for rejoining me in this space. Whether you're listening to the audio version or you're checking us out on YouTube or whatever streaming platform you're using, thank you so much for jumping back in this space. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I've always shared with you that there are individuals that I have that we've shared space, or some that we've never met. And today I get to chat with somebody who I've not yet met. And I say that because in just a few months from the recording, about 2 weeks from this dropping, we will be in space together down at NCMLE in North Carolina. I have Dr. Julie Hasson on with me today. So Julie, how are you?
I'm well. I'm so excited that you're coming to North Carolina.
I'm excited to return. I've only been there one other time, and that was for NCMLE last year.
Yes.
So really looking forward to returning, seeing some more of the sites when I'm not learning or sharing. So Julie, tell us a little bit about who you are and your journey in this space of education.
Sure. Well, my journey in education probably starts like way back 1975. I hate to age myself so early on this podcast.
Oh, it's all right.
But first grade, dyslexic, highly anxious kid, no confidence in school, like didn't feel like I belonged in this community of learners. And lucky for me, I ended up in Nancy Russell's classroom. And Mrs. Russell, through this patient, persistent, and kind of creative multisensory approach, taught me how to read and taught me to love reading. And I started to love everything about school. And all I wanted was to be a teacher, just like Mrs. Russell. So I did. I taught primary grades K through 3 for 15 years and then became an assistant principal and principal for the next 10. 3 of those years, I was Mrs. Russell's principal, which is like a whole podcast episode in itself.
Yeah.
It was the pleasure of my professional life. She was just as amazing in like year 30 something of her teaching career as she was when she taught me. And I moved into higher ed in 2015, the year Mrs. Russell retired. I couldn't go on without my Mrs. Russell. And I had to teach graduate classes, which I felt comfortable and ready to do, but I also had to have a research focus. So my mentor kept asking, like, what is the question you want to answer? And all I really wanted to know is, how do teachers like Mrs. Russell make this lasting impact on our lives? Like, what do they say? What do they do that sticks with us? And she had done that for hundreds, maybe thousands of kids like me. And I got a sign at Office Depot that said, let's chat about a teacher you remember. And I would go to like parks and farmers markets and anywhere I wouldn't get arrested for loitering with this sign. Probably collected over 600 stories that people told about teachers like Mrs. Russell. And I loved that work. I wrote a book called Safe, Seen, and Stretched in the Classroom about that work. And I really thought I would continue on that research focus. But around 2018, some of the teachers I worked with who were really amazing teachers started to quit teaching. And then 2 years later, pandemic and a whole wave of other teachers decided they just couldn't stay. So I shifted my focus from teacher impact to how do we help teachers keep making an impact. Became a certified resilience trainer, really focused my attention on 2 things: increasing teacher resilience and increasing teacher engagement, because those are the 2 factors that really make a difference in teacher retention. So that's where I am here today. I'm coming to you from my office at Appalachian State in the mountains of Western North Carolina, where I teach grad classes in school administration and I continue to research resilience and engagement as a focus on teacher retention. I developed the Teacher Recharge Project, which is focused on those two areas. And I do professional development in schools and districts, which is how I've come into contact with you, my friend. And I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Man, I'm so privileged and honored to have you in this space with me. As I was listening to all the things you said, it's interesting when you get to come full circle. I
Mm.
was never a principal of a former teacher of mine, but I did work side by side, which was very interesting because,
Yes.
everybody was their first names except for Mr. Hayes.
Yes.
I could not call him Mark. Like I knew I was like, no, you're still my fifth grade teacher.
I know Mrs. Russell is still Mrs. Russell to me. And, I was her principal and we're connected still. And I could never call her Nancy. Like, I just couldn't. Partly because just continue to be in awe of
Mhm.
her. And even as her principal, I would walk through all the classrooms and I would sit down on the floor in her second grade classroom and watch her teach. And she's such a master, that level of teaching when you see it. And I would want to lean over to kids and whisper, "You're so lucky."
That's awesome. That's all. I remember. So in fifth grade, we had Dare, and so
Mm.
Mr. Hayes was our Dare teacher. And so when we had our company party, uh, I went out and we were at a bar, and I was like with Mr. Hayes, and I was like, I'm not supposed to be doing this. Like you taught us,
Right.
this is not okay.
Sir Hayes taught you to just say no.
Yes, I was like, sorry, I'm not allowed. I would have water, please.
Yes. Yes.
No.
Lemon.
So I'm really glad you're in here. I heard a few of the different pieces that you pulled out, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And you're right. It feels like there are a multitude of episodes. So I'll probably be extending an invite in the future, depending on which road we go down today. I'm like, "Oh, I really wanted to talk about this other thing." So, but I'm
That's
curious, like, what is it that you want to talk about today?
I love your counter narrative podcast because I hold a somewhat controversial opinion. I can't wait to talk to Charles about this. And I've been thinking about this so much and preparing for our conversation. In education, we tend to think about teacher resilience in terms of environmental factors, workload, working conditions, compensation, admin support. All of that is valid.
Hmm.
And also, we have to talk about teacher inner resources. What kind of resilience resources, wellness practices do teachers bring to the work? So we can't just say it's about compensating people well or providing them the resources they need to do the work or the admin support that they need. Because in any helping profession that's challenging, nursing, teaching, social work, we have to bring some resources to that work. We can only teach well when we are well. And so when teachers say to me in a resilience training, I get a lot of resistance. I'm tired of having to be so resilient. I get it and I feel it. I still teach. But at the same time, I can acknowledge that teaching is hard, but also acknowledge that sometimes we make it harder.
Mm.
And I can't wait to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I'm glad you're bringing this up. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but one of these spaces where I present often is at the Innovative Schools Summits.
Yes.
Typically, I'm in Vegas and in San Antonio. I've already booked those for this year and next year. So
Great.
one of the things I do there is a pre-workshop, and that workshop is about resilience. And
Mm-hmm.
so the moment you said that, I was like, oh, I'm curious what she wants to talk about. But like what you're mentioning, the workshop does focus not on those external factors, but to say, if we are going to be okay, because the reality is, like you, and it really comes from the lens of what we're doing for our students, although I've been
Mm-hmm.
considering like, hey, people in the space, like this applies to you as well. Like
Yes.
we're not okay. We like to
Mm-hmm.
say that we're resilient, but we're not okay. And I think part of that is we're bouncing back to a space that we were before, and we're just kind of pretending, right? We're like, all right, we experienced it. I've went through it. I'm back. And so one of us, kind of what you're talking about, the whole idea of the workshop is about being proactive. What are the skills and the strategies that I can build up so that way when I do face, a tragedy or an obstacle, that I could really have the tools and equipment within me necessary to say, I'm going to be able to get through this thing and learn and grow even stronger, and not necessarily just say, well, if my paycheck was higher, I would feel better afterwards. Because
Yes,
the
which is
reality is you're
true.
not going to. I mean,
I
you
mean,
might have some more money to go to
yeah.
Target, but you're not really
And
going to feel better.
and I acknowledge, like, if you're a teacher raising a family and you're struggling to pay the bills or put gas in the car, that's really crucial
Absolutely.
for resilience. So I acknowledge all of those environmental factors, but at the same time, we have to build those inner resources. And I love the way you said it. And I think about this all the time. We can't build them when we're suffering and in some
Hmm.
kind of really difficult situation. It's like our App State football team, who's amazing. They don't run the plays in the game. They get really good at the plays in practice. Then when the game comes, they're ready to run the plays.
Exactly.
So for us, we have to build those resilient strategies as a practice so that when we're in a moment of struggle or challenge, we're ready to run that play.
Yeah, what prompted me for this, unfortunately, so I've shared with you, I'm in Chicago, I'm on the west side, and unfortunately, the neighborhood and where I work is very much lies into some of those narratives that exist about,
Yeah.
the poverty and the violence, and we've
Mhm.
lost multiple students. And it's always interesting to see the reaction of the district and other spaces to say, oh, students, you've had a tragedy in your school. We're going to send out counselors. We're going to send out social workers. We're going to send all these people to your building. And my students, to be honest, they get angry. Like, now you want to show up?
Right.
Now you want to be here? Now you want to do these things? Like, we don't need them now. We needed them before. Where were you before? And to be honest, Julie, like, I'm an advocate for my kids. And so I'm like, let them know. And so sometimes people are like, well, why would they say those things? I said, because this is their reality. Like, we don't need to try in the moment to try to build those things. If we, as we know about brain science, like we physically, biologically can't anyway, but
Right.
it's not the time. And so I'm curious as we're thinking about this, because I love the fact that we're on the same page here. Like, why do you think this is? Why do you think we as educators, so typically focus on the external, so typically focus on being reactive than being proactive?
Mm.
As you've been doing this work, has anything kind of come up as why this is so common and why we're addressing it today?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, one, it's hard. Working on yourself is hard. It's a practice. So, a lot of the professional development, the things we do in education, you bring somebody in, they do an hour if we're lucky. I heard your conversation with Jen Abrams about professional development. If people have not listened, you need to listen. It's so good.
Yes.
But to bring someone in for an hour to teach you some resilience practices and then they buzz out and think you'll be able to implement any of those practices is crazy. And I still have to, like, every day, practice the things I teach. And sometimes I still don't do them well. So this is something that gets developed over time with lots of support and lots of training and lots of practice. And we don't tend to give things that kind of time.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's we just had PD.
Mhm.
So on Monday, obviously, this what as of this recording, this past Monday was a holiday. Tuesday we had a PD day, and I felt guilty at the end of it because I felt rushed. And I
Mhm.
knew that if I felt rushed, my staff felt rushed.
Yeah.
And so I made a point on Thursday to do a debrief with them. And I said, hey, can we talk about Tuesday? Let me know what went well, what didn't go well. And one of the things that did surface was like, it felt like we were putting way too much stuff into it. Right.
Yeah.
Which then allows me to bring that back to the admin team to say, hey, like, I know we got a lot of things to cover, right? But did we do ourselves a disservice by trying to hit all of them and not
Mhm.
really making moves on any of them? Right. And so you're absolutely right. Doing work on ourselves is hard. It takes time, and we don't always allocate enough time, energy, resources to do that work.
It's true. And I have had to learn, like you, as someone who does professional development, I want to give them everything. I want to tell you all the best things, everything I know that will help you. And then it's just a flood of information that no one can use. So I try to come in with like three 4 maybe practices, just simple, easy to implement things. This week, I was talking to a teacher who's feeling overwhelmed about the news
Mm-hmm.
from, as we record, still California wildfires, big freeze on our side of the country, and all the political stuff. And we talked about this concept of XIZO, which is zooming in, zooming out. If you think about your perspective like a camera lens, what she really needed to do in this situation is zoom in. Tiny focus on my home, my classroom, my people, what I need to do, and stop this big wide lens that was overwhelming her. Anytime we're overwhelmed, we can zoom in. She also has a teenage daughter. So when she gets in conflict with her teenage daughter, that's an opportunity to zoom out. In perspective, if we think about the larger world, or we think about a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, how important is this zoom out? So she's super skeptical, and she tried it for a couple of days, and she said, oh my goodness, this XIZO crazy sounding thing really works for me. So for me, if I can give them like just a few tools instead of flooding them with everything I know, it's a better use of an hour or 2 hours. But it's hard for people like you and me who just want to tell them all the things and give them all the things and love on them.
Yeah, yeah.
Just don't have enough time.
So I'm curious as we're thinking about this, because right, I'm sure there are individuals who are listening right now who are like, Julie, I hear you, right? Like I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I don't want to do this. This XIZO thing sounds interesting. I want to learn a little bit more. But also, like, if you're saying that I have to come, right? If this is the work that I have to do, and they're not giving me time at school or at my spaces, if you were to talk to somebody, what would be some tips, some ideas, some strategies that you might give them to say, hey, like we talked about just a moment ago, you said, I don't want to give you information overload, but what would you tell somebody? What are some really quick things or simple things that they could continue to implement where they could build this internal resilience?
I think globally, intention and attention is important because we tend to go on autopilot, right? We have so much to do and we're checking off the list and we're thinking ahead 10 steps, and our brains on autopilot, as you know, tend to be unfocused. We're biologically wired to scan for threats all the time. So focus takes intention. We're biologically wired to have that negativity bias because we're looking for threats all the
Mm-hmm.
time. So one of the things I teach, like if someone said you can come in, you have an hour, 10 minutes even, you can teach one thing. It's regular check-ins. Whether you schedule a 5-minute check-in with yourself when you drop your kids off at lunch or at certain times throughout the day, just to stop and kind of scan the body for tension, let go of any tension. I like to just hang like a rag doll or shoulder shrug. Check in with your mind, your brain. What thoughts am I thinking? Am I ruminating on some unhelpful stuff? Can I do a little check and change on my thoughts? What emotions am I feeling? Do I need a minute to just process some difficult stuff? So if we could just stop and check in, a few deep breaths, check in body, heart, and mind, that would go a long way for teacher wellness because we push through and we feel some urgency to keep pushing through and keep
Yeah.
going. But in the end, I think we're served better and our students are served better and we're better to our colleagues if we can just stop and check in, because a dysregulated teacher is not good for their own well-being or anyone around them. So a check-in, I think, for me is foundational. And then from there, we can build on some other tools.
I appreciate you sharing that. I was thinking back to this meeting that I had on Thursday, and I use a tool, and I forget the name of the organization or the gentleman who shared it with me, but it's like the Daily Five. If you look it up, you can find it.
Yeah.
And what's beautiful is they send out a daily email, and there's all these tools and things in there that I use with my staff and my students. And so one that was on Thursday, it was just a check-in, right? We always start the meetings off with a check-in. And there were 5 different cupcakes, 5 different colors representing just how are you showing up today. And it was interesting because, most people were the last 3 cupcakes, which were all the positive cupcakes. And they're
Mhm.
like, I'm a green, I'm a yellow, I'm a blue, and it's like, okay. And then somebody was like, well, I'm going to be honest, I think I'm like a pink today, right? Which I know pink is a happy color, but what it was representing on this was like, I'm not doing so well.
Mhm.
And, it was kind of like, oh, so we can say we're not okay. And to be honest, I shared with them, I said, for the purpose of this meeting, I'm presenting as a 3-4, right? This green yellow. I said, but I'm really showing up as a pink purple, right? I said, because right now I'm dealing with some things and I'm not okay. I said, but for you all, I'm putting on the show. I said, but just know, like recognizing, and it was interesting in that space to have that honest conversation. Like sometimes we put up the facade, we do the thing we need to do, but it's still important for us to be mindful, right? Saving that space and being mindful of how am I showing up and what do I need to do to take care of myself?
Had this amazing high school, I mean, had so many amazing teachers, but she was my high school history teacher. And I want to say I had her for every history, like world history, all the histories, American history. And I took an elective just to have her again. Joan Barentine was her name. And she was always the most professional, most energetic, most positive teacher. And one day she came in and she looked at us and she said, I'm having a really hard day. We had to put our dog down yesterday and I'm really sad about it. And I just wanted you guys to know if I'm not myself. And I thought, what a great model for saying my interactions and actions today may not be my best version of me. And so I'm just going to proactively share that with you. And I remember, in a high school class, how sweet and compassionate kids were to her in that space. And I think about her anytime I'm struggling and try to hide it. I'm not doing anybody any favors. I just need to be honest and say, hey, it was a rough morning and I am not on my game. I'm going to do my best for you, but just so you know. And that honesty and vulnerability is powerful.
And I think about the spaces and where we work, whether it was staff, students, or even in those dynamics, to create a space where that is a norm, right? This
Mhm.
is who we are, that we're able to be honest with one another and just say, I'm not okay today. And for us
Yeah.
to be able to honor and respect that. Like I might look okay, but I can share with you that I'm not. And if I need a moment, if I need something, I've recognized within those past couple of days at work, right? I was just going through a couple, and my students were just like, "Are you okay?" And I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah." And I was like, I'm not. I said, "I'm trying." And and it was interesting because I always tell them, "Let me know if you need anything." This was,
Yeah.
and then it was so heartwarming because they looked at me and just said, "Let me know if you need anything."
Oh,
And it was just like, oh, like,
such
but
good
it's
modeling
it's
you've
those moments
done.
we make that we normalize those things in our spaces
Mhm.
instead of just the facades and like everybody's happy, everybody's okay, and which is a whole issue with social media. But I think that's another
Yeah.
conversation.
I mean, we could talk toxic positivity for hours and hours. Like the good vibes only is so dangerous for teachers and students in a school. If good vibes are the only acceptable vibe, then for me, I'll feel not accepted when I come in without good vibes. Like it's not a comfortable culture to be. I need to be able to come in and still be part of this community on days when my vibes are not the best vibes.
Thank you so much for sharing all of these things, and I'm watching our time, and I'm just like, my goodness, it goes by so quickly here. So I'm curious as we begin to wrap up the conversation, which we could easily extend forever. I'm curious for somebody who just says like, for those naysayers, right? Hopefully for individuals thus far, they're like, hey, you're right. There are things I can, right? I can't control whether or not my paycheck increases. I can't control that toxic teacher that's in the lounge complaining. I can't control those things, but I can control how I show up. Julie gave me an easy, simple tool of a check-in. I don't need an app. I don't need a handout in order to complete it. It's something I can do whenever, wherever. But for individuals right now who might be listening who are still skeptical, just saying, I don't know about this, right? I can't do that work. I don't think that's going to, like, I'm sure you've encountered these types of individuals. So typically, what would you say to somebody right now who might still be, I'm not sure if this is going to be, work for me?
One of the things I do is frame my work as recharge. And we talk about our batteries because that's friendlier than talking about resilience. People understand my battery, my charge, sort of like your cell phone, except that your cell phone tells you when your battery's low and gives you an alert. You have to do that for yourself. When I do trainings with teachers, the first thing I have them do is just brainstorm. What charges your battery? What deletes your battery? And the simplest thing to do is figure out how to do more of what charges you and less of what deletes you or depletes you. That's it. It sounds simple. It's not that simple, but it really is just that self-awareness. What charges me up? What about my work is energizing? What about my work is depleting? Can I do less of it, or can I approach it or think about it differently if something is depleting? I would start there. And I don't know that even our most resistant folks could argue with that. Like, let's do more of what makes us feel better, whether that's one-on-one conversations with kids or spending more time with that one colleague who's like sunshine, and let's do less of what depletes us. Say no to the things that deplete you. Spend less time with that, kind of down in the dumps colleague who gives those compliments that aren't really compliments. You know the ones I'm talking about. Just more of that and less of that. That's the gist of it, isn't it?
I love it. A while back, I remember I went to the Special Olympics with my students. They had asked me to go. And I went. And in my mind, I was just like, this is going to be all day. Like, I had all these things. Obviously, as school leaders, we have a to-do list that's a mile long. And I was like, if I do this, I'm not going to get any of those things done.
Right.
But they said, please come. So I went. And I had a fantastic time. And it was in that moment that I kind of came up with this idea of, today I got to. Not that I had to, not that I was told to, that I got to. And I think that as educators, if we could, at the end of every day, identify just one thing that today I got to do this. Like, this was an honor. This was a privilege. This was a blessing to me that I was able to do this thing. Right? We start to shift the way we are viewing our day, because true, I could create a list of all the things that I had to do that annoyed me, that drained me. And if that's all I've ever focused on, I won't see those things that were charging me up, and I need to recognize those. So I love the analogy of the battery.
I love that too. And when we teach teachers to reflect, like, reflection is an important part of developing as a teacher. They tend to reflect on the things that didn't go well or the challenges. But if they could reflect also on the celebrations, what went right today? What can I celebrate today? That would help balance us out a bit. It's just like what you said. What did I get to do today? How did I make an impact today?
Yeah. So I'm before we close up, I teased a little bit at the beginning that as of dropping this episode, it's about a week and a half or so, somewhere in there, before the NCMLE, where you and I will get to join together down in Charlotte, North Carolina, with so many other phenomenal educators. So somebody might be listening to this. It's like, hey, I want to join. I want to connect. I want to learn more about Julie. Can you give us a little plug about your session or sessions that you're going to be running while you're there?
I am so excited about a session I'm doing. It's a new session for me, but it still has the foundational things I teach, called How to Impact Lives and Still Have a Life. And I can't wait to teach it about all of those practices that help us leave work with enough energy to have a personal life and to feel satisfied and whole and healthy and happy. So I'm teaching that session plus one for beginning teachers on how to develop some of these resilience tools right away in the beginning of our work so that we can stay longer and grow stronger and keep making an impact on kids. And I can't wait to see you. I'm thinking last year at NCMLE, our sessions were at the same time. So I need to check this year because I might have to bribe someone if they are.
No worries. I have one session, but it is a 2-block session.
Oh, cool.
So hopefully I'm assuming that they're not going to both be running, like you're not running back to back. So
I will get in there at some point, no matter what. So tell us, what is that session?
Yeah, so mine is focusing on, this work that we do as educators about burnout. So very, very similar. It's a school leader session that has gone from, just kind of an idea to a PLC that has run multiple times here with Chicago leaders, to a workshop hosted by the state of Illinois. So here in Illinois, school leaders have to take a class once a year to keep their license current, and so they've tapped into that session. So it has grown, it has blossomed, and so it's typically like a full day to a 3 hours. So I'm going to cram it into two, but really talking about using almost like the analogy of your check engine light on. Like I don't know about you, but when you get in that car, and I did this yesterday, right? And it's just those things we do. I saw my fuel gauge, and I was like, I think I have enough, right? Which I should have got gas before I left for work, which I did not. And of course, on my way back, the light comes on, and I'm just like, I think I could go a little further. I think, right? And we do that all the time. Like we ignore the lights that come on, and then when our car breaks down, we're like, what happened?
We put ourselves in a really difficult, uncomfortable position because we pushed on, didn't we?
Exactly. And so
All the
and we
time.
do the same things for ourselves. And so
We
we
do.
talk about identifying the warning lights that pop up in your life, not ignoring them, right? And really using a concept from Greg McCown of essentialism, right? Like what is
Mhm.
important and what isn't. It's like, let's stop making everything essential because it really isn't. And so
Is
that
it?
has been foundational in the work that I do. You talked about leaving, like I'm at the building early because I'm an early bird, but I'm
Mhm.
also gone like shortly after the kids are gone. And the other day I left and they were like, "Where's your bag?" And I was like, "What bag?" And they're like, "Your stuff." And I was like, "It's in my office. It'll be there tomorrow when I come back here because I'm
Right.
leaving now and my day here is done." Right? Like, and I'll be honest, like in the beginning, I was a school leader that was first one in, last one out, like always working. I prided myself on like, if you call me at 8 o'clock, I've got your call. Like, no, that is not okay. And we've created that. And so then it is also our responsibility to dismantle that. And so that's my workshop. Hopefully
Well,
leaders
I
will walk
love
out of
that.
there and saying,
And
I'm gonna pay attention to the dashboard.
if leaders could model that for their teachers, how empowering that would be. My principal does not expect me to give up my whole life for this work because my principal does not give up his whole life
Oh,
for this work. That's really powerful, Charles.
thank you. Thank you. So I mean, I'm looking forward to spending this time with you, popping into at least one of your sessions. And
Oh,
so
thank you, friend.
if listeners are not able to join us live and in person, how else can they connect with you? How can they follow you?
Best way to find all my stuff is to go on teacherrecharge.com. There is a digital course with my favorite tools coming out on Tuesday. So if you're
Congrats.
looking for those tools and strategies and you can't find them already on teacherrecharge.com, they will be in the course. For me, having a course that teachers can take at their own pace over a period of time and practice the tools has been such a goal and a dream. So I'm so excited to launch that on Tuesday.
Wonderful, wonderful. So make sure that you go over there. I will make sure that that link is in the show notes. So
Thank
if you're
you.
driving right now, please don't try to write that down.
No,
Like
don't do that.
just go back and check out the show notes. And if you're driving, I hope you're not watching this. That would be also awfully
Yes,
bad.
that all.
So Julia, I just want to say thank you. Obviously, one, for coming on this show and for connecting in this space with me. But more importantly, just thank you for all the work that you are doing. I think that this is work that needs to be done. I especially love the workshop that you talked about working with, as our friend Katie Kinder calls them, baby teachers. You
Yeah.
know, like this should be part of a teacher prep program, which unfortunately is not. So I hope that the work that you do continues to grow and influence others. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Charles. It was so good to spend this time with you.
Wonderful. And for those of you watching, for those of you listening, as always, until next time.